This lesson deals with the topic of animal ethics. And of course, someone might say immediately, well, aren't humans animals too? And of course that's true, but when we talk about animal ethics, we're talking about, of course, non-human animals. And there's several issues that arise, some of which you may be quite familiar with, and we'll discuss those a little bit, and then bring in some concepts and some ideas that are used when talking about ethics and such issues related to animals. So, as the slide says, we're talking about the moral status of non-human animals. Do they have any moral status, as we generally agree that humans do? Some current issues are hunting, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept at least, and possibly have direct experience of the practice. And so the ethical issue becomes, well, is it morally okay, for example, to hunt animals just for sport, just for fun, when we don't need to feed ourselves? Others are concerned about the fact that we may use advanced technology and such to hunt animals, not giving them a fair chance, and that it would be a more ethical practice if the animals had a fair shot of getting away. Another issue is the question of eating animals. Now, some people refrain from eating animals for health reasons, for example, because possibly they can't tolerate certain things, or they want to lose weight or something like that. But in this context, we're talking about moral vegetarianism, where people refrain from eating animals or even animal products like eggs for moral reasons, because possibly they think that factory farming is cruel, or they think that there are alternatives to eating meat and animal products that don't involve the death or exploitation of animals, and so they would take that route instead. Still, another issue involves using non-human animals to test things like drugs and other sorts of things like cosmetics to see what effect they would have on humans. So they're tested on animals first. And as people point out, some of these tests can be quite cruel and involve some pretty great pain for the animal. The ethical question is whether this is justified. And finally, in this section of current issues, there's the question of endangered species. These are animals that are close to extinction, and one moral issue is whether human beings have an obligation to prevent species of non-human animals from going extinct, or moreover, whether we have an obligation to change our behavior to try to keep this from happening. For example, a lot of extinctions are going on due to climate change, and there's a question of whether climate change is anthropogenic, that is, whether humans are the cause or the primary cause of these changes in the environment that are causing these loss of habitat that's leading possibly to extinction of certain species. So these are some of the current issues, and I'm sure you've debated these at some point with someone, or at least heard debates about these topics. Now, when we turn to approaches to animal ethics and thinking about it, there's just some concepts that come up. One of these is sentience, and as people point out, animals have the ability to feel. They can feel pain, they experience the world much in the same way that humans do. And so since they can feel pain, if we were thinking that part of ethics is the practice of not bringing more pain into the world if we can avoid it, then animals have a certain moral status. You can see that this is a utilitarian sort of view, although you might also think about the care ethics we've talked about. Another issue is animal welfare, and again, the concept is important to understand, and the idea is that, well, under what circumstances are animals leading a good life, and the lives they lead, of course, are going to be different from the ones we lead, and different species of animal are going to be leading different lives, and so their welfare is relative to the kind of life that's natural to them. And then the moral question is something of the sort of, well, are we obligated to allow them or to help them even to lead the kind of lives that are good for them? And a last and related issue that comes up, at least on this slide, is the idea of speciesism. And this is a word that was developed like the word racism or sexism, where you're discriminating against someone because of their membership in a certain class. And so the idea is, well, because these creatures are not human, therefore it's okay for us to treat them badly or treat them differently than we treat humans. And a lot of people who push for this animal rights or something along those lines that will argue that, well, no, they shouldn't be separated out merely because they're not human. The most important thing is that they're sentient, that they can feel pain, and that they have certain kind of lives that are good lives for them. And so it's irrelevant what species they belong to, just as it's irrelevant for the sake of the moral status of humans, which race different humans belong to. And then there's the notion of animal rights. And so on the one hand, we don't typically think of non-human animals as being what we call moral agents. That is, if they do something that we think is wrong, we typically don't hold them morally responsible for that action, even though we would hold them causally responsible. They actually are the ones that did it. We would think that they don't meet the requirements of being a moral agent, much like we would think this maybe about a very small child doing something that their brains are not developed enough to understand the difference between right and wrong. But the way we think of animals in terms of animal rights is as moral patients, that they have a moral status simply in virtue of being a certain kind of living thing, and they have interests. So if they have interests, then we would have obligations towards them to respect their interests, just as we do with other human beings, and say human beings who maybe aren't moral agents, like small children or people who are incapacitated. We still have to treat them with a certain amount of respect and not do certain things to them that would be morally wrong. So these are just some of the issues and concepts that come up when we talk about animal ethics and the moral status of non-human animals. Maybe that gives us a little bit to think about and discuss in our lesson.